Hi there, everyone. My name is Brody Friesenhahn from EPA Region 6, and I'm joined by Sam Yoon and Ian Ussery. And today we're going to be speaking with y'all about underground injection control Class 6 wells and the ins and outs of the application process. And yeah, thank you for having us. We're excited to be here and grateful. So this is just kind of a brief overview of where we're headed with this talk. We're going to go through a federal overview, permit phases, the ins and outs of the Geologic Sequestration Data Tool, or GSDT, the federal resources, permit application, and then public perception, all related to the Class 6 process. So federal overview. Class 6 wells are used for underground injection of carbon dioxide for the purpose of geologic sequestration, and they're the newest UIC well class. The Class 6 final rule was promulgated in 2010, and we have seen increased interest in Class 6 permits due to financial incentives, and these are the 45Q tax credits and climate change mitigation strategies. EPA has and is developing tools to assist permit applicants and permitting programs. So what are the phases of a Class 6 permit? Well, it starts off with the pre-permitting phase, and this begins when we receive notice of a project. And then it moves into the pre-construction phase. So that's when we receive an actual permit application. And then we begin reviewing that application during this phase. And then once a permit is actually issued, we enter the pre-operation phase. And we continue another round of reviews, and then an authorization to inject is given, and that leads us into the injection phase. And there's another phase of review, and that leads to the post-injection phase. So that comes after the cessation of injection, and then we authorize a site closure. So this is kind of an expansion of what I just discussed. And the highlights of this slide is just to show that at every phase of the project, there is a round of review. And so these documents and projects and applications are all kind of living and breathing things, and are subject to change as we learn more with each phase. So let's just think about, when we receive the initial permit application during the pre-construction phase, we will be given an AOR. And then during the permit to construct, that AOR can be finalized. And then the authorization to inject, the AOR is then reevaluated. And so with each piece of data that we continue gathering throughout the phases of this project, we're able to learn more and more and more, and we can kind of tweak and modify these different aspects of the application to be sure that that this CO2 that's injected stays where it's supposed to stay, and all of this is done safe and that groundwater is protected. So the Geologic Sequestration Data Tool, or GSDT, is where the actual permit application is going to be submitted. And over here to the right, you kind of see the welcome to the GSDT. And so this is where applicants will go to submit their applications for a Class 6 well, and this tool was developed by headquarters. And so here, the link in the top left is we have the registration form, instructions, and the GSDT login page. And folks can go to that link for more information, or you can email gsdatool@epa.gov. Sorry about that. And the system acts as a guide for the permitting application. There's also resource library, Class 6 application templates, and GSDT system user guides. And over here on the right, you'll see kind of the dashboard and everything that is within this tool. And you can see who has access to these projects, the project members, and then there's here, kind of as I was mentioning, there's the general information, facility and owner operator information, initial permit application, updated information, complete submission. So this is just kind of a little taste of what folks will see when they are actually getting into the permit process. In addition to the GSDT, there's also a CBI protected OneDrive link, and that is used for the file sharing process because currently in the GSDT, it is not CBI secured, so some of the information has to be redacted. So that just allows us to actually see the information so that we can do a thorough review. Okay, and then federal resources. So the Class 6 rule is deemed to be flexible to allow accommodation for site-specific needs and risks. The guidance documents present Class 6 rule requirements, provide recommendations, and offer alternatives that go beyond just your minimum requirements. And this guidance is not prescriptive and doesn't cover all situations that could come up in a project. So folks should contact permitting authorities early on with site-specific questions and considerations, just to be sure that everything goes as smoothly as possible. And these are just some examples here. You have on the webpage some of the resources that we have, the definition of Class 6 wells, protecting drinking water resources, requirements, background information, and then here we have our actual Class 6 guidance documents and a Class 6 permit application guideline. So all of this stuff is available on our website. And here some of the guidance documents are targeted for the actual applicants themselves, and then there are certain documents that are targeted for permitting authorities. And these are just examples of some of those documents. So pre-permitting considerations. This list is not totally exhaustive and is, again, all of this is site specific for each project. You know, these based off of your setting and location, projects can be very different, and some can require additional permits that go beyond us at UIC. So it's just important for applicants to look into their sites and be sure that the necessary permits are considered and are applied for that are not within our scope in the UIC section. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and pass this over to Sam, who's going to take it from here.
Thanks, Brody. To apply for a Class 6 permit, applicants must develop and submit to the UIC Program Director a range of geologic, hydrogeologic, modeling, engineering, and financial information about a proposed Class 6 project. Applicants must also submit plans for the life of the operation, including AOR delineation and proposed and final corrective action, testing and monitoring, well plugging, post-injection site care or PISC, and site closure, and emergency and remedial response. Included in those plans are the proposed and final well construction specifications, proposed and final operating plan and pre-injection testing plan, financial responsibility demonstration, and injection depth waiver application and aquifer exemption expansion if necessary. Some of the elements in the GS project plans are subject to alternatives per UIC director's discretion. Next slide, please. Characterization information submitted by the permit applicant must include regional geology, hydrogeology, and local structural geology. Detailed site characterization, maps of the injection well, area of review, surface water bodies, artificial penetrations and fractures and faults, and synthesis of data to demonstrate site suitability. The applicant must demonstrate that the injection zone can receive the total anticipated volume of the CO2 stream based on areal extent, the applicant must demonstrate that both the overlying and underlying confining zones are free of transmissive faults or fractures, has sufficient aerial extent and integrity to contain CO2 stream and displaced formation fluids, and will allow injection at max proposed pressures and volumes without initiating or propagating fractures. Well owners and operators must identify all USDWs. Regulations require initial delineation of the area of review using computational modeling, which accounts for the injected CO2 plume and the area of elevated pressure. They also require identification of existing artificial penetrations within the specified area and periodic reevaluation of the AOR at a minimum of every 5 years. The reevaluation relies upon operational and monitoring data. The regulations allowed for phased corrective action at abandoned or other wells in the AOR at the UIC director's discretion. Financial responsibility requirements establish that owners or operators must demonstrate and maintain financial responsibility for performing corrective action on improperly abandoned wells in the AOR, injection well plugging, PISC and site closure activities, and emergency and remedial response. Financial responsibility and cost estimates also minimize the risk of a company failing to meet these obligations and thus prevent passing costs to the public. The owner or operator of Class 6 well must demonstrate and maintain financial responsibility. Cost estimate components include corrective action, injection well plugging, PISC and site closure, and emergency and remedial response. The financial responsibility instruments used must be from the following list of qualifying instruments: trust bonds, surety bonds, letter of credit, insurance, self-insurance, escrow account, and any other instruments satisfactory to the director. When using a third-party issued FR instrument, documented proof that the third party meets a financial test or bond rating must be submitted. And as an example, the total financial responsibility for the 3 projects in the table equates to millions to tens of millions of dollars. These Next slide, please. The injection well construction requirements specify the design and construction of Class 6 wells using materials that are compatible with a CO2 stream over the duration of the Class 6 project to prevent the endangerment of USDWs. We sometimes recommend to applicants that they construct stratigraphic test wells to Class 6 standards so that they may eventually be used as injection wells or monitoring wells once permitted. Logging, sampling, and testing that must be performed before injection of CO2 may commence include appropriate methods to determine or verify the depth, thickness, porosity, permeability, lithology, and salinity in all relevant geologic formations. Whole cores or sidewall cores of the injection zone and confining system and formation fluid samples from the injection zones. Determination or verification of the fluid temperature, pH, conductivity, reservoir pressure, static fluid level, and other hydrogeologic characteristics of the injection zones, and determination or calculation of the following information concerning the injection and confining zones: fracture pressure, other physical and chemical characteristics of the injection and confining zones, and physical and chemical characteristics of the formation fluids in the injection zones. The injection well operating requirements provide operational measures for Class 6 wells to ensure that the injection of CO2 does not endanger USDWs, along with pressure limitations and requirements for automatic shutoff devices. Injection and operating condition requirements are meant to avoid unintended consequences such as induced seismicity and surface purges. Next slide, please. The testing and monitoring requirements define the elements that must be included in the required testing and monitoring plan submitted with the Class 6 permit application and implemented throughout the project to demonstrate the safe operation of the injection well and track the position of the CO2 plume and pressure front. Testing includes, first, analysis of the CO2 stream with sufficient frequency to yield data representative of its chemical and physical characteristics. Second, testing of monitoring wells so that they will not become conduits for fluid movement. And third, annual external mechanical integrity testing and pressure fall-off testing every 5 years. Monitoring includes continuous monitoring of internal mechanical integrity, passive seismic monitoring network, injectate monitoring, corrosion monitoring of the well's components, groundwater quality monitoring, and at the UIC program director's discretion, surface air and or soil gas monitoring. The reporting requirements establish the periodic timeframes and circumstances for the electronic reporting of Class 6 well testing, monitoring, and operating results, and requirements for keeping records. Semi-annual reports include changes to CO2 stream, monthly average, maximum, and minimum values for injection pressure, flow rate, and volume, and annular pressure. Exceedance of operating parameters for annulus pressure or injection pressure, description of any event which triggers a shutoff, monthly and cumulative values of CO2 injected, monthly annulus fluid added, and results of other monitoring. And with that, I'll be passing it off to Ian.
Thank you, Sam. I'll be going over the plugging plan component of the Class 6 application. The injection well plugging requirements specify that a Class 6 injection well must be properly plugged to ensure that the well does not become a conduit for fluid movement into USTWs in the future. Materials used must be compatible with the injectate and formation fluid. Now, bear in mind that facility changes may necessitate plan amendments prior to the actual plugging. When the plugging commences, a notice of intent or NOI to plug must be submitted 60 days prior to plugging for UIC program director to review. It is recommended to include information such as the time and date of the plugging, name or location of wells, and the parties performing the plugging. The NOI template is available in the GSTT resource library. If applicable, submit amended well plugging plan to address changes in the plugging procedures required to ensure proper closures. A well plugging report is also required, and this must be submitted 60 days after plugging for the UIC program director to review. This is a detailed account of how injection well plugging plan was implemented, and it's to be retained by the owner or operator for 10 years following site closure. Next slide, please. Now, for the post-injection site care and site closure plan, or PISC, this basically outlines the monitoring strategies and how non-endangerment of USDWs will be ensured throughout the post-injection site care phase of the project. This is to confirm that the applicant proposes to use proper plugs and cement in all monitoring wells and that they are of suitable construction and at appropriate depths. The plan describes site closure and site restoration activities, and the post-injection site care and site closure requirements address activities that occur following the cessation of injection. The owner-operator must continue to monitor the site for 50 years following the cessation of injection, or for an approved alternative time frame by the UIC director, until it can be demonstrated that no additional monitoring is needed to ensure that the project does not pose an endangerment to USTWs. Following this, they must plug the injection and monitoring wells and close the site. The next component is going to be the emergency and remedial response plan. This requirement specifies that the owners or operators of the Class 6 wells must develop and maintain an improved emergency and remedial response plan that describes the actions to be taken to address events that may cause endangerment to a USDW or other resource. Identified scenarios must include the possible severity of the incident, the project phase during which the event may occur, any avoidance measures that might be taken, and outline detection methods and response actions. Next slide. Thank you. Okay, now the last two components I want to talk about are, for the most part, optional. They are site specific. So you have the Class 6 ejection depth waiver requirements, which provide a process under which Class 6 well owners or operators can seek a waiver from the injection depth requirements in order to inject carbon dioxide into non-USDWs that are located above or between USDWs, including injection depth waiver provisions in a state's regulation is optional. Now, a supplemental report is generated for the review by both the UIC director and the EPA regional administrator and verifies that the injection zone is appropriate for geologic sequestration and is contained by confining units both above and below. The well construction, operation, and monitoring are tailored for this specific site, and above all else, the USDWs are not endangered. Now, no new aquifer exemptions for Class 6, except only expansions of existing Class 2 aquifer exemptions are permitted. The EPA administrator must approve expansion of existing exemptions. If owner-operator is seeking an aquifer exemption expansion, they must define the areal limits of the expanded aquifer exemption per 40 CFR 144.7 and submit information to support a determination that the proposed Class 6 aquifer exemption meets the criteria of 40 CFR 146.4. Now, we've had a few applications come in-house, and we wanted to take this opportunity to kind of go over some things that we've learned in the early stages of these projects. First and foremost, I can't stress this enough, read the guidance documents related to GS projects that the EPA has created, which can be found on our EPA website. As an applicant, please give yourself adequate lead time in your project for permitting processing. Expect the process to be no shorter than 1 year from the time an application is deemed administratively complete and is submitted for final determination. Think in terms of a Class 1 hazardous waste well more so than a Class 2 disposal well. Also, communication is key. As an applicant, talk with EPA prior to working on the permit submission or drilling a well, and EPA should be talking with the applicant both prior to and during the course of the permitting process. So please notify and get in touch with your region's UIC program as soon as you are about to pursue a Class 6 project. Don't assume anything. Please ask. Documentation of conclusions reached by the applicant is essential. The whole philosophy of just trust me just doesn't work when going out for the public notification phase of your project. The more detailed your application is, the less red flags show up on our end, and therefore makes a better case for the public perception. Now, specific to Region 6, we have a parallel submission process that we have established. As Brody made note before, the CBI component of the GSDT is not quite finalized yet, although works are in the process to make the GSDT CBI protected. We have a OneDrive submission program process that we have set up to ensure that the documents that an applicant sends to Region 6 can be reviewed, and we can start taking advantage of the draft portions that an applicant chooses to submit to that OneDrive folder to speed up the review process and make the final permitting process go a lot smoother and faster. Next slide, please. Also, a component that all applicants should take very seriously is the public perception aspect of a Class 6 project. Environmental justice concerns and that of tribal concerns have definitely taken more a front stage aspect of the Class 6 projects. If any portions of the AOR are in disadvantaged communities, you as an applicant need to compare maps of your AOR to maps of known disadvantaged communities and facilities that may adversely be affected. We at EPA have a tool called the EJ Screen that can be found on our website. And this can give you an analysis, and based off that environmental justice analysis, you can indicate that the proposed site may be near disadvantaged communities that are also exposed to environmental risks. Confirm that any appropriate mitigation measures, such as additional monitoring perhaps, are included in the Class 6 permit. Coordination with co-regulators of other injection well classes, also public drinking water utilities, other federal, state, tribal, or local authorities may be essential at various stages of the Class 6 project. This is definitely a component that we want to make sure to keep on everyone's mind when it comes to dealing with a Class 6 project. Now, there are some states within our region, in particular, Region 6, that are interested in pursuing state primacy when it comes to Class 6 projects. The Safe Drinking Water Act 1922 outlines 6 core elements that are required for a state to pursue primacy. They include 1, a letter from the governor, 2, complete program description, 3, an attorney general statement, 4, a memorandum of agreement or MOA with the EPA regional administrator, 5, a copy of all applicable statutes and regulations, and 6, a demonstration of compliance with public participation requirements. The Class 6 specific requirements can be found at 75 Federal Regulation 77-230. Now, is currently in the process of getting their primacy, and it is currently in the stage of being reviewed by the agency. We also have had discussions with Texas, New Mexico, and Oklahoma regarding primacy process for Class 6. It's important to remember that states' programs must be at least as stringent as federal requirements per 40 CFR Parts 124 and 144 through 146. The primacy process is estimated to take anywhere between 2 to 4 years or longer. For Class 6 projects, there are a number of resources that we heavily promote and utilize ourselves. We have outlined just a few here. Definitely take advantage of the National Energy Technology Laboratory, or NETL, for data. Also, the USGS has a voluminous library of resources for outlining your particular project and the site. Also, as we noted before, we have a number of documents that are on the EPA website that we highly, highly encourage you to use. Also, be familiar with the EPA greenhouse gas reporting. This is where you will be taken to finalize your MRV plan, and this will help set the stage for applicants to start receiving those 45Q tax credits. And also the GSDT training library is something we highly recommend for experience and getting used to utilizing this data tool. We have been notified by our states that if primacy is pursued and achieved, that the GSDT will probably be a tool that will be used by the states, seeing as how it's already kind of up and running. So the more familiar an applicant is with the tool, the better things will be in the future. And with that, we would like to say thank you very much for taking the time to listen to our presentation on our Class 6 permitting process. If you have any questions regarding any of the elements that we covered today, please feel free to reach out to either Sam Yoon, myself, Ian Ussery, or Brody Friesenhahn for any additional questions, and we will be happy to assist you in the future. Good luck, and we will talk to you all later.